I know. Okay, I know. Don't panic, we'll get through this together. It may be May and it may be really warm outside, but today I have a spooky video for you because today we're gonna dive into a topic that generally scares the bejesus out of me, and that is painting hands. But because we're in Classical Art Month, we're not just gonna be painting hands, we're gonna paint Renaissance hands. Before we dive in, I want to give a massive shout out to Marco Bucci. Last Sunday on my birthday, all I did was eat and binge watch his tutorials until I passed out. Best day of my year so far. But he has a wonderful video on how to paint hands that should get you started with the very basics. I'll leave a link to it up here. But today we're going to focus a little more on how to get your hands looking all soft and graceful and realistic and still painterly looking like the old masters did back in the day. I want to approach this almost like we would a style study, but only focused on hands across really old paintings. So I do want to structure this video in two sections. In section 1, we'll take a look at drawing the sketch and posing the hand and the wireframe, and eventually how to add mask to it. And in section 2, I'll show you some rendering ideas on how to achieve that soft and supple and realistic look. If you're enjoying Classical Art Month and find this video in particular really helpful, make sure to show it some love, give it a thumbs up, hit that subscribe button, leave a comment below, do all that cool stuff. It really helps the channel out so much. But without much further ado, let's dive into Classical Art Month episode 2. Okay, I don't know about you, but I'm not one of those people who can just go straight in and paint a pretty anything, let alone a pretty hand. So first we're going to look at some important attributes to what makes up the base of a hand in a classical painting. I've got a basic canvas here, and I've started with a bunch of random looking sheets to show the back of the palm. This is based on something I saw in Marco's video, and I thought it would be an excellent way to start a hand. You want to make sure that one side is quite a bit longer than its opposite side. The longer edge represents the knuckles and the shorter edge opposite is the wrist. Also, just to keep things clear and understandable today, I'm going to call these joints the knuckles and these ones the small joints of the fingers. Alrighty, let's start building upon these. One of the first things I noticed when it comes to the pose of the hand is that you have the middle and ring fingers clumped together, and either the pinky is up or the pointer finger is up, or they both are. This is a very dynamic and believable way of posing the fingers because for the most part, this is how they work in real life. The index finger does its own thing, especially if you're writing or drawing. The pinky does its own thing when, say, you're holding a teacup or typing, and the middle and ring fingers often tend to be together, bending and moving in synchronicity. For now though, I'm just roughly indicating some wires for each finger. We'll flesh it out in just a second, but it is important to have these construction lines down first. Look at the palm of your hand. Do you see that muscle at the base of your thumb? That is actually made of a bunch of adductor and abductor muscles, but you'll see that a lot of old masters like to really exaggerate this muscle, creating a noticeable amount of space between the thumb and the rest of the hand. This is actually something that varies across classical art, where some artists prefer to have the thumb quite close to the palm, while the others like a lot of space in there, but in either case there is pretty much always a lot of bulk in the flesh at the base of the thumb. This is a detail Marco mentioned in his video, and ever since then I haven't been able to unsee it in every hand ever. There is almost always a rhythm in the knuckles that is echoed in the small joints of the hand. If there is a peak in the row of knuckles, you best believe the small joint of that finger is also higher than the rest. Why is this important? Well, for one thing, it is anatomically correct. The knuckles and small joints are bridged together by a bone, and bones are inflexible and don't squash or stretch. So moving one end will always move the other end, and that's just logistics. However, in a more artistic sense, having echoing rhythm and patterns across both sets of joints creates a lot of fluidity, almost like the ripples in water where the waves are concentric circles and they get bigger as they go away. Another aspect that really adds to the fluidity is the fact that the fingers of the hand are almost always bending inwards. You will pretty much never see a straight, rigid finger, no matter who the subject is. This just adds to how relaxed and graceful the hand looks, and is a great way to add realism since that is the natural state of the hand. No matter how taut they want to indicate a line to be, the old masters almost never actually use straight lines to indicate any part of the hand. It is pretty much always built on curves, be they deep or shallow. This is especially important around the edges of the fingers, since this is where a lot of us tend to go in with straight lines. And that makes sense since we see the bones as straight lines, and so we assume that determines the edges of each finger. However, we don't take into account the fleshy bits on each finger, and that is where a lot of anatomically perfect art strays away from the classical way of painting. Back in the day, the emphasis was more on painting the impression of a scene rather than replicating it exactly. So even if something was painted to seem realistic, it was almost always just a projection of how the artist felt in the scene rather than what they physically saw. And when they looked at hands, they saw grace and fluidity, which is most powerfully indicated by long, languid curves rather than short, spiky lines. So whatever pose you pick for the hand, try using curves to indicate every edge, and you'll instantly find it looking way more graceful. Alrighty, here is a tiny detail that I almost missed, but looking at the very tips of the fingers, you'll see that they tend to be swooshed upwards. Like, I know that's how fingers are, they kind of end at a narrower tip, but there is a subtle exaggeration here that causes the fingertips to narrow in and very slightly be flaked upwards, at least in the more feminine, graceful hand. This actually serves a very important purpose. Having the fingertips flake upwards creates a continuation to the curve of the rest of the finger. So instead of having an abrupt ending, it is almost like the fingertip leads onto an invisible curve. And this is probably interesting only to me because I'm a nerd like that, but you'll see that in the more masculine, rigid characters, the fingertips are sometimes not swooshed upwards. Instead, they are flat and stubby, ending in a rounded square. And that is very abrupt and might indicate a very authoritative, strict, almost dictatorial character. In other words, the hand just isn't as graceful or fluid. It's the little construction details like this one that determine how the hand feels in the painting. And I think this is also an important lesson in how every single detail is used to tell the character's story. This is where we see more of a distinction between a soft, plump feminine hand and a more angular, strong masculine hand. This doesn't depend on whether the subject themselves are a man or a woman, but rather the effect and story that we're telling. To emphasize this, I'm actually going to draw two copies of the same exact hand. I have this reference photo linked in the video description, but it felt like the perfect pose to work with this style of painting hands, and just to really drive home how much of a difference it makes when you render the hand differently, I'm actually going to use the same exact base sketch for both of our hands. The first one will be the softer, more feminine hand, and the second one will be the less soft, more masculine hand. Again, nothing to do with the gender of the subject, but rather to do with the effect that you get. Whatever the type of hand and whatever style you're painting in, really, here are some common color zones you want to keep in mind. The fingertips and joints almost always have a deeper redness than the rest of the hand. If you're painting a paler hand, it is obviously going to look pink, and if you're painting a darker hand, you want to add a bit of redness at the joints, maybe with an airbrush set to overlay or soft light blending modes. You'll see some blue or green veins on the back of the hand. A cooler skin tone will show veins that are more blue, while a warmer skin tone has more green veins. Adding veins is a really nice realistic detail that you'll see in a lot of classical art. And although the palm of the hand isn't visible in the vast majority of classical art, where you do see the palm, it is usually pale and has blotches of pink around the shadowy areas, as well as some subtle veins running across. You'll also see some paleness and even a cooler tone on the back of the fingers between the knuckle and the first small joint of the finger, and this really pushes that red at the joints to really stand out. Another very common detail across the board is that there are some strong dark shadows between the fingers and around their edges. This adds some nice separation and breaks the monotony of fairly pale, soft colors in the palm. Alrighty, let's now look at the difference between the feminine and masculine hands. This bit, I would say, applies to women, children, and possibly noblemen as well, since I'm guessing they didn't work with their hands very much. You'll notice that with this type of hand, there is no shadow on the back of the palm that indicates the metacarpal bones, but lots of squash shadow in the palm if it is visible. There might be a little bit of redness at the knuckles, and against a pale rest of the hand, this almost acts as a bit of shadow, making the pale areas look nice and plump, kind of like the chubby hands that babies have. And the final detail I want to mention for this type of hand is the shine. Both types of hands have shiny specular highlights, but with the more feminine hand, you have this shine running across the sides of the palm and fingers, making the skin look super smooth and glossy. Again, this pushes the soft plumpness of the skin, and because it runs across all of the sides of the hand, it almost makes it look like the lines in the hand aren't deep enough to interfere with the shine. In other words, since creasing usually comes from repetitive bending and squashing of the skin, it makes you subconsciously think that the hand isn't even really used all that much, and that's why you'll see this in the more feminine characters or noble people, since neither of these archetypes are known for manual labor, at least historically. This is the type of hand you'll see in workers, warriors, and older people, because here's where you'll find the more wear and tear. Well, relatively speaking. While the feminine hand had smooth, plump skin, here you're going to see more sharp lines, small shadowy areas, and harsh folds. There's more pronounced shadows at the knuckles and small joints, and often even the fingertips are dark, almost as if they've been in dirt or grease. You'll see a lot of little folds at the joints, thin slivers of light and dark, which create contrast, and contrast equals texture, so the skin doesn't appear as smooth or supple. Here you'll actually see some definition of the metacarpals, which are the bones on the back of your hand that join your knuckles to your wrist. So you'll see some shadow around some of the bones, or paler protrusions where the bone would show through the skin a little bit. Again, not nearly as chubby and plump as the feminine hand. In general, I found myself using a smaller brush radius with this hand just because it had way more details and textures. And finally, with the specular highlights, though they are fewer, you do still see them, but instead of having bits of shine running across the entire side, you now have smaller highlights folding into the nooks and crannies of the skin. And here they further enhance the depth of these folds and creases rather than just brush over them. So here are the two types of hands. What other differences do you see? So there we go. Do you feel like you have a handle on this topic now? FBI, open up! I'll show myself out. No, but seriously, I personally feel a lot more confident painting hands having been through this process. What do you think? Will you be trying these techniques out? Do you already paint like this? If so, let me know in the comments below. If you've enjoyed this video, please remember to like and subscribe. We're on the road to 10k. It's gonna happen, mark my words. It's called the law of attraction. But in either case, I would love to have you along for the ride, so make sure you subscribe. You can always come say hi and tell me what you'd like to see on the next video over on my Discord server, or you can check out all of my art over on Instagram. I love reading your DMs on there as well. And if you'd like to support the channel, make sure you check out all the extra tutorials I put up every single week on my Patreon. Links to everything are always in the video description. And that's about all I have to say today, so thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have. Check out some more videos up here, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Bye!